For Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Ukraine war is all about momentum. It has to be. Russia needs to be seen as winning the conflict right now because there are pushes from several quarters for a peace deal to be reached. If Russia is winning, Putin believes, that gives the country more leverage in future peace negotiations. That's why Russia has launched a massive summer offensive. But Putin has a problem. Russia's momentum is slipping. Why? Because the country's summer offensive in Ukraine is collapsing around Putin, and it's already starting to look like an abject failure. This offensive was supposed to be massive. On June 30th, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that Putin had deployed 50,000 soldiers around the city of Sumy, which is in Ukraine's northeast. That city and the Sumy Oblast that contains it is Putin's key target for his summer offensive. Russia's leader has a goal of creating a buffer zone in Sumy that will allow Russia to defend its borders against Ukraine. Putin doesn't want a repeat of the Kursk counter-invasion we saw in August 2024. The more of Sumy that Russia takes, the less likely a repeat is to happen. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrskyi, knows precisely what Russia is trying to do. Their main strategy is to wear us down through sheer numbers, he said when talking about Putin's Sumy offensive. That's always been Putin's strategy. Syrskyi points out that Russia's summer offensive, combined with actions months before, has stretched the Ukraine war's front lines by nearly 100 miles, meaning Ukraine is now fighting across a 750-mile front that's designed to stretch and test its defenses at every point. The New Voice of Ukraine notes that attacks in the Sumy Oblast grew more intense in June. Putin started threatening that Russia would soon take the oblast's main city. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Russia is using North Korean missiles in its attacks on the Sumy axis, which accounts for around 23% of all Russian strikes. However, Russia's advances aren't what Putin would have hoped. Worse yet, Ukraine has managed some counterattacks, notably retaking the city of Andriivka mere days after Putin's forces captured it. We'll come back to Sumy in a moment. It's not just this northeastern Ukrainian oblast that's a key target for Putin. Donetsk is also on his radar, as it has been for years. Specifically, Putin wants to take the city of Pokrovsk, which is a vital Ukrainian logistical hub, and would put Russia within touching distance of Donetsk's administrative border. Take Pokrovsk and you take Donetsk. That seems to be the logic under which Putin is operating, which is likely why he's amassed a staggering 110,000 troops near the city. CNN reported on June 28th that Syrskyi believes the regions around Pokrovsk to be the hottest spot along the massive front line Putin has created. Russia has been trying to capture the city for over a year, CNN says. By taking it, Putin partially breaks the defensive spine Ukraine has set up in Donetsk. With Pokrovsk down, Russia could then focus its efforts on taking other key cities and towns in that spine, including Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka. Russia would also take control of Ukraine's last remaining coking coal mine if it snatches up Pokrovsk. Plus, the loss of such a key logistical through line would weaken Ukraine to the point where other cities we've just mentioned are easier to assault. So there's clearly plenty of logic behind Putin's summer offensive. And Russia's leader is nothing if not committed to his goals. Combined, he's amassed over 170,000 soldiers to take Sumy and Pokrovsk. That creates a daunting task for Ukraine's forces to overcome. For a while, it looked like Putin might even find some success with his summer offensive. That's according to The Telegraph, which reported on June 29th that Russia was on track to break its own record, set the previous month, for the number of individual offensive operations it launched against Ukraine in a single month. Russia was also starting to gain more ground. In May, The Telegraph says Russia snatched up 5.5 square miles of territory per day on average. That amounts to a little over 170 square miles for the month in total, Russia's largest single-month gains since November of 2024. Steady gains were made in Donetsk, The Telegraph reports, and Russia was managing to take some slithers of territory in Sumy. The offensive seemed to be going as planned. Gains were being made, and Russia appeared to be making its numbers advantage count in key areas with its higher volume of offensives. But all of this good news for Putin did little other than mask something that Russia's leader doesn't want to admit. Russia's summer offensive is collapsing. And the reason is that the momentum Russia gained earlier in the summer has all but stalled out. That's according to The Telegraph, which reports that Russia's early summer momentum is already slipping. It spoke to Angelica Evans, who is a Russia analyst with the Institute for the Study of War. Evans says that despite Russia's massive troop numbers, it simply isn't capable of achieving what Putin wants to achieve this summer. The capacity to start something new and distinct really isn't there for the Russians right now, she says. The summer offensive is just going to be a continuation of what they've been doing in spring. That's terrible news for Putin. Spring was hardly great for Russia in terms of capturing territory. We see that in the May numbers we shared earlier. 170.5 square miles is roughly equivalent to the size of San Jose, which seems impressive on the surface. However, None of this territory covers any key Ukrainian settlements, cities, or fortifications. It's all ground Russia has captured because it's not as well defended as the regions it actually wants to take. The previous months of spring were even worse for Russia when it came to snatching up territory. In April, Russia only managed to capture around 67 square miles of Ukraine, according to the New Voice of Ukraine. The month before, the number was somewhere between 55 and 78 square miles. These captures are happening at a time when Russia is losing at least 1,000 soldiers per day. For instance, May 30th saw Ukraine inflict about 1,250 casualties on Russia, says Pravda. If we take 1,000 soldiers per day as an approximate and conservative estimate, we can tell how damaging the spring was for Russia. It gained 315.5 square miles of Ukraine during the 3 months leading into June. Those 3 months contained 92 days, meaning Russia burned through 92,000 of its soldiers to capture that territory. That's a rate of over 291 soldiers per square mile of Ukraine gained. This is Evans' point about capacity in a nutshell. The 160,000 soldiers Russia has amassed for its summer offensive in Sumy and Donetsk doesn't look nearly as impressive when you see that Russia lost almost 2/3 of that amount during the spring. Putin's force isn't as overwhelming as it seems. As Russia intensifies its attacks in the summer, Ukraine will inflict more casualties than it did during the previous 3 months. We'll come back to that later in the video. Let's zone back in on Sumy. Earlier, we mentioned that Putin has amassed 50,000 troops in the Sumy Oblast because he wants to create a buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine. Putin has even implied that he wants to capture Sumy itself. During the recent St. Petersburg Economic Forum, he declared, "The city of Sumy is next, the regional center. We don't have a task to take Sumy, but I don't rule it out." Putin may have not ruled it out, but Ukraine has done it for him. The 50,000 troops in Sumy have been stalled out so completely that they're capturing barely any territory at all. That's according to Siersky, who the BBC says claimed on June 26th that the line of combat in Sumy has been stabilized and that Russia's summer offensive in the region has been choked off. Siersky also noted that he has responded to past criticism that the oblast wasn't as well fortified as it should be. Additional fortifications, the establishment of kill zones, the construction of anti-drone corridors to protect our soldiers and ensure more reliable logistics for our troops are obvious tasks that are being carried out, the BBC reports him as saying when talking about what Ukraine is doing to protect Sumy. The point here is that Putin apparently felt like he could take advantage of perceived weaknesses in the Sumy Oblast during the summer. He was wrong. His 50,000 soldiers have already been halted by the end of June, and Ukraine is building more and stronger fortifications in the Oblast to ensure Russia isn't able to regain any momentum. The buffer zone Putin wants to create isn't coming. Russia certainly won't be capturing Sumy city, at least not during the summer, and it gets worse for Putin. As he watches his Sumy momentum grind to a halt, he's also having to deal with Ukraine pushing back against his forces. That's according to the Kyiv Independent, which reported on June 30th that Ukraine has taken the initiative in Sumy and is starting to push Russia's forces back. Beyond the liberation of Andriivka, which we mentioned earlier in the video, Ukraine has advanced on the village of Oleksivka, which is about 18 miles outside of the city of Sumy. Russian advances have also been halted across the Kursk border and across the expanded front line Russia has created in Ukraine's northeast. All of this is despite the fact that Russia has deployed some of its best brigades to Sumy, along with aircraft, long-range artillery, and attack drones. Zelensky also commented on what's happening in the oblast, stating, "The Russian plan for an offensive in Sumy Oblast is not succeeding, thanks to every Ukrainian unit operating in the area. So Sumy is a no-go for Putin." His 50,000 troops have already been halted and show no signs of being capable of regaining the small amount of momentum they had earlier in June. Still, there's always Donetsk. Pokrovsk is on Russia's radar this summer, as is the other key Ukrainian regional hub of Konstantinivka and other Donetsk cities we mentioned earlier in the video. With 110,000 troops dedicated to that region, surely Russia will make gains there, even if it's achieving nothing in Sumy, Putin must think. But he's wrong. Evans hints at this when speaking to The Telegraph, stating, "Russia has really been focused on what we call the Ukrainian fortress belt, which includes Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, and Slovyansk. But they haven't really shown since the first few months of the war to make very rapid and widespread advances they would need to take these cities." An unnamed Ukrainian non-commissioned officer, or NCO, also spoke to The Telegraph and pointed out the sheer size of the force Russia would need to make any progress in the Donetsk region. To take Kramatorsk, they would need an additional 100,000 men, the Ukrainian NCO said. They needed 40,000 to take Avdiivka, 70,000 to take Bakhmut, and that included some very well-trained and capable Wagner mercenaries, the NCO said. The NCO makes a couple of interesting points here. The first is the sheer number of soldiers Russia needs to gain ground in Donetsk during the summer. Right now, Putin has 110,000 troops stationed near Pokrovsk. If he's going to take Kramatorsk, which is just one of the 4 cities he's targeting in Donetsk this summer, he'll need practically all of those soldiers. He'll need several 100,000 more if Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, and Sloviansk are to fall. It all comes back to what Evans mentioned earlier. As impressive as Russia's numbers advantage may seem, it's not enough to achieve Putin's objectives. The point about Wagner's mercenaries is also an important one. Russia's key gains in Donetsk during the Ukraine war were made on the backs of experienced veteran soldiers who brought skill along with sheer numbers to the fight. The skill aspect is now lacking in Putin's summer 2025 campaign. We see that in Konstantinivka, the Telegraph reports, as Ukraine is outnumbered by up to 20 soldiers to 1 in some sectors of that region, but it's still managing to hold its ground. Russia's current crop of soldiers isn't as skilled or experienced as those it had earlier in the war, and those less skilled soldiers are also fighting with inadequate equipment. That's according to Nick Reynolds of the Royal United Services Institute. He tells The Telegraph, "The Russians are in a tricky position given the level of attrition they're taking. They've been unable to sustain that pressure due to their stock of refurbishable weapons, specifically artillery and armored vehicles. Both are in increasingly short supply." According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost 29,754 artillery systems and almost 23,000 armored fighting vehicles as of July 1st. It's also lost almost 11,000 tanks. The point here is simple. Having tens of thousands of troops for a summer offensive doesn't mean much if those troops don't have the armor they need for their attacks. That's why Russia has lost so much momentum. Though it still has the numbers advantage in terms of manpower, the attritional nature of the war Putin started has taken its toll. Ukraine is taking advantage and pushing Russia's forces back. Here's what all of this means for the future of the war. For one thing, Putin isn't going to be creating his Sumy buffer zone anytime soon, and certainly not during the summer. That zone is supposed to provide support to Russia's poorly defended border regions, such as the previously mentioned Kursk, and its creation is one of Putin's main objectives for the summer. We're only in July, and it's pretty clear that Russia doesn't have what it needs to create that buffer zone. It's also already starting to feel the effects of that failure. On June 22nd, the BBC reported that Russia hasn't been as successful as it claimed at pushing Ukraine's forces out of Kursk. It says that Syrskyi claims that Ukraine still holds a small area of territory in the Russian oblast, which it captured back in August. That's a problem for Putin. It means that some of the 50,000 soldiers who are supposed to be fighting in Sumy are instead diverting to Kursk to deal with Ukraine's forces there. Putin tried to stretch the Ukraine war's front lines with his Sumy offensive. Now he's dealing with fighting on a front he didn't anticipate rearing its head again. Ukraine may even be able to use the territory it still holds in Kursk to create a pincer, with forces from that oblast hitting Russia from one side, while Ukraine conducts attacks from within Sumy. Again, that just stalls Russia's summer momentum and prevents Putin from creating the buffer zone he wants to build. As for Russia, everything that we're seeing right now means only one thing. The Ukraine conflict is going to drag on, likely through 2025 and at least into 2026. That's according to CNN's Tim Lister and Costa Gak, who wrote on June 30th that Russia's summer offensive has been underwhelming, even with the increase in the number of attacks the country is launching. CNN notes that beyond Sumy, Putin has claimed that Russia will keep fighting until it holds all of Donetsk, along with the contested Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Russia's slow rate of progress right now, which shows no signs of increasing in the summer, means achieving that goal would take years, the CNN reporters claim. Plus, they point out ceasefire negotiations seem to have taken a back seat as the Trump administration is currently more focused on the situation in Iran than it is on achieving peace in the Ukraine war. Russia is trying to feed into its summer offensive. CNN reporters point out that both Ukraine and Russia are building up their defense industries with an eye toward their conflict moving deeper into 2025. Rostec, which is Russia's largest military conglomerate, is now producing around 80% of the weapons Russia is using against Ukraine. The company's production has grown tenfold since 2021, leading to it generating revenues of between $31 to $46 billion in 2024 alone. That production means that Russia can carry on, even if its summer offensive fails. The question is, for how long? Russia's economy is creaking. Right now, nearly a third of Russia's federal budget is dedicated to the military, with defense investment amounting to around 6.3% of the country's gross domestic product. The situation is bad enough that Putin announced on June 27th that he intends to cut Russia's military spending over the next few years as he tries to pull his country back from the brink of an economic collapse that has resulted in Russia having a 20% base interest rate and monthly inflation hovering around the 9 to 10% mark. In simple terms, this means that less money is going to be spent on Russia's military at a time when Putin is trying to make as many gains as possible. We're already seeing Russia stalling out in Sumy and failing to achieve its objectives in Donetsk this summer. As Putin's invasion drags into 2026, The impact of reduced spending and Russia's economic woes are only going to make things worse for soldiers on the ground. They'll have even less equipment, their numbers will go down. The pressure on Ukraine will be relieved, creating more opportunities for counterattacks and pushbacks. Perhaps what we're seeing in Russia's failing summer offensive is a sign of things to come, as Putin's momentum not only halts but gets reversed. Still, there's one thing Russia's leader has going for him: missiles and drone strikes. The Kyiv Post says that Russia has drastically increased its drone strikes in recent weeks, with Kyiv, Odessa and Dnipro all being targets. On June 29th alone, Russia broke its record for its largest missile and drone strike on Ukraine during Putin's war. It launched 537 of these projectiles at Ukraine over the weekend. Ukraine managed to fend off most of the attack. The country's air force proclaimed on June 29th that it had neutralized 475 of the 537 incoming targets, including drones and missiles, through a mix of direct interceptions and electronic warfare measures. But it wasn't enough to stop the damage. Ukraine lost one of its F-16 pilots in the assault, though that pilot managed to shoot down 7 of Russia's projectiles before his death. Russia's assault also managed to batter several Ukrainian cities, though the full scale of the damage is still being assessed. Putin will be happy about that. However, these increased drone and missile strikes are also a symptom of what's happening on the ground. For as much damage as they can cause, these projectiles don't take territory. That's up to Russia's troops. This summer, those Russian soldiers are utterly failing to complete the objectives Putin has set for them. Drone and missile assaults are an attempt to mask that failure, but it's plain for everybody to see. Russia's momentum is stalled in Sumy. Putin hasn't built a force anywhere near strong enough to achieve what he wants in Donetsk. Russia's grand summer offensive is already deflated. And things are going from bad to worse for Putin. As his summer offensive fails, he's also having to deal with more intense Ukrainian strikes against Crimea than ever before. See how Ukraine is liberating Crimea one strike at a time in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering the latest Russian failures in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.